So welcome to our virtual seminars on applied economics and policy analysis in Central Asia. My name is Bahram Kasimov. I will be moderating the session today. We're very honored and privileged to have our speaker, Mr. Hans Holzhacker, Chief Economist at the Carrick Institute, based out of Urumqi, China. So he will discuss today the COVID-19 and the economy challenges and prospects for Central Asia. Briefly about our speaker today, he needs no introduction, but so before joining the Carrick Institute, Hans was for 2 years lead economist for Central Asia with the EBRD, based in Almaty, Kazakhstan. He studied sociology and economics at the University of Vienna and has years of experience working in Central Asia and outside. Hans's topic will be discussed by our own colleague, Dr. Aybek Yuldashev. Dr. Aybek Yuldashev is our senior lecturer of economics at Westminster International University in Tashkent. So with that, Hans, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you, organizers, for having me. Thank you, everyone who dialed in and is looking. I'm actually, as it is appropriate these days, I work from home, and I'm Austrian, so I'm currently talking to you from Vienna, Austria. Let me shortly give you an overview of what we are going to discuss today. First, I give a little bit of an overview about the international economic situation, showing the latest data and the government reactions to the situation. Then we will have perhaps a short break for questions and a little bit of discussion. Then we move to Central Asia, and there I will give an overview over challenges, also forecasts, then a little bit discuss what are the most vulnerable parts of the population in Central Asia in this situation, then talk a bit about the room of maneuver to adopt measures by the governments in Central Asia, and then discuss a little bit more in detail, not too much in detail, but a little bit more in detail, the responses by the Central Asian countries. So let me start with the international environment. Not by surprise, we see a heavy slowdown from the latest data. So let me show you the latest data here. This is about the swing in GDP, real GDP growth from the fourth quarter of 2019 to the first quarter of this year. So, and the black line that you can see is the difference between the growth rate last time and this time. And as you can see, so the pack is led by the People's Republic of China. They switched from plus 6% growth to minus 6.8% growth. So really a heavy change. But as you can see from the chart, there's basically all the countries worldwide saw a slowdown. The Central Asian countries have still positive real GDP growth. You can see them in red and green. So we see Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan. For Turkmenistan, usually we don't have data. There are not very many data available for Turkmenistan. But as you can see, the Central Asian countries are still growing, however, at a lower pace. If we look at the data where we have already also some April readings, like in the industrial production. Again, the black line is the difference between March and February on the left-hand side, and between March and April on the right-hand side. Here, interestingly, the Kyrgyz Republic has the sharpest slowdown. To be frank, I don't know what exactly this is. It's not gold, it's not Kumto. Without Kumto, it's even worse, and it's also extended in April. So we have a sharp contraction of industrial production in the Kyrgyz Republic. We have still growth in Tajikistan in industrial production, and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, but at a slower growth. And as I mentioned before, in the Kyrgyz Republic, also in April, we have a big decline. Going more to the consumption side, again, we see most of the countries less growth than before. On the right-hand side, before the dotted line, you see the People's Republic of China. There we have some recovery. However, growth in retail sales is still negative. And also in April, if you look on the right-hand side, again, the People's Republic of China, we have still a decline compared to a previous year in retail sales. So consumers have not really come back. For the Central Asian countries, you can see a very sharp decline in April in Kazakhstan. They have also a decline in Uzbekistan. The Kyrgyz Republic, as opposed to industrial production, is still in the positive space. And in April, retail sales were even a little bit growing year on year. So what to do with such a situation where we have a heavy contraction of economic activity all over the world? Governments and international financial institutions as well are going to take measures to overcome this situation. And I quote here, at the beginning of the crisis, everyone was saying we will spend whatever it takes. And here I quote Carmen Reinhardt. She's the new chief economist since a few weeks of the World Bank, and a famous scholar of studying economic crisis. So let's have a look what it means, whatever it takes. One of the unprecedented measures to ease the economic situation is quantitative easing. So central banks, first they cut their policy rates, and the central banks of the major countries were buying at an unprecedented quantity government bonds and other bonds. So as we call it, quantitative easing. The People's Bank of China also spent almost $1 trillion for this purpose. So we have strong easing of monetary policy in the main countries. We have huge fiscal packages. Here are the 20 large G20 countries depicted. That you can see fiscal packages go until 35% of GDP in case of Germany, Italy. United States have a big GDP, and nevertheless they spend 10%, so it's really unprecedented. However, not of all the spending is really spending money right now at the moment. What is called here below the line measures. This is basically expenditures with are not due right at the moment, or which the governments hope to get back, repaid loans and equity, which then they would reverse there and go out of the companies again. So only the yellow, the orange bars are really revenue and expenditure measures. Also, here's the definitions are not always clear, and things are moving still. But what is clear is that these are really unprecedented packages to prop up the economy. What kind of measures are adopted by countries, by the major ones, but also by the others? You see the upper half of this slide shows expenditure measures, and the lower part shows revenue measures, so foregone revenue. So on the expenditure side, you have something like energy subsidies, sectoral support, and so on. The most popular are transfers to firms and transfers to households, also wage subsidies. And on the revenue side, most of the countries adopt some tax deferrals, both for firms as well as for households. The numbers here written is the percentage of countries which adopt such measures. Other measures include spending on healthcare equipment, state equity stakes. We had this already, like TUI, Renault, Alitalia, Lufthansa are examples. Looser regulation of insolvency laws, employment retention support, expanded access to short-term work subsidies, wage support, direct financial support, and important, especially also for the Central Asian region, direct transfers, cash handouts to households. Any questions at this point? Shall we discuss something, or shall we go further to Central Asia?
I see no questions in the chat box, so we can go forward.
Can I ask a question, if I may? If I'm
One
allowed?
question.
Yes. Thank you very much. I mean, for a very interesting discussion on the international trends, and we see that the governments have been very active in supporting their economies and the supply side. In your opinion, Professor, how in general the governments were prepared for the crisis of the following type that we observe, and in your opinion, how well they were prepared, how well they were balancing their support for the enterprises on the one hand, with the support for the workers and their families on the other hand?
Okay, let me be frank and answer the first question. I don't think governments were very well prepared. Also, in terms of the pandemics itself, I personally came to Austria on the 1st of February from China, where there were really heavy controls, and I was expecting I will be quarantined or something, but no action at all. I just went to the city without any control, with even anyone talking to me. So I don't think that time, and also the WHO that time has not declared a pandemic. So in some way, I think the world was slow to react to the pandemic as such. In terms of economic measures, I think, well, there was some delay as well. However, I'm still impressed what is possible under shock. So I think the governments and also the international financial institutions reacted quite fast, even though not being prepared. Maybe not everything went well immediately. And actually early reaction, both in economical terms as well as directly to the pandemic, was very important. There's some evidence that the countries who acted decisively early fared much better in the pandemic as well as in the economy. So this is the answer to your first question. To your second questions, maybe we will discuss a bit later even more, because it depends a little bit on the kind of economy, what you should do. Also the mix of monetary and fiscal measures depends a little bit on the situation. Like in countries which large parts of vulnerable populations, like not very much of social protection, no unemployment benefits, no direct even channels to address them, probably a direct support to households is the way to go, at least in part. Whereas in countries where maybe it's more important to keep the business going, and if the business are going, the social situation is not so bad, you concentrate a little bit more on the company side.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any more questions, or shall we go further?
Yeah, I think we can go further, Professor. We have some questions coming in, so I will read at the end.
Okay, later, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about Central Asia. This table here I borrowed from a larger one table by the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, my former bank. And it shows both kind of the channels through which the crisis works, through which the crisis affects the countries, as well as how resilient these countries are to the specific shocks. And what you see for Central Asia, also not a big surprise. Central Asia is affected severely by labor market shocks, and external shocks come in, especially for the commodity exporters via the commodity prices, and remittances are also very important in Central Asia, and resilience is not too high to these challenges. So let's talk about the challenges a bit more in detail. Here can you see the development of oil and gas prices. So obviously there is a huge decline in both. Not only because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had a dispute between Saudi Arabia and Russia before, but the crisis is prolonging, is keeping the prices low for a prolonged period of time. Copper prices fell as well substantially. I put here in this chart also gold, in part because it was also mentioned in Uzbekistan that gold is hedging Uzbekistan a bit against the drop in other commodity prices. Is a gold exporter also, but has a tendency as a safe haven investment. So more demand for gold, and the gold price is rising. So this is good for Uzbekistan and even more for the Kyrgyz Republic, which is a big gold exporter. Sharp decline in remittances as well. You see, we go from 65 billion estimation to 47, 49 for 2020, 2021 for Europe and Central Asia. So a sharp decline expected. And in the right-hand table, you see how important remittances are for the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan. A bit less for Uzbekistan, but also important. So Kyrgyzstan is almost 30%, Tajikistan, this is almost 30% of GDP, depending on remittances. So this is definitely a big issue, beside also the social issue of migrant workers coming home, not always easy. We all read about this in the news. So remittances and labor migration is a big topic to discuss as well. Next challenge, as commodity prices fall and as remittances fall, we have, of course, an impact on the exchange rate. And we see a depreciation basically in all Central Asian exchange rate. The only exception is the official rate in Turkmenistan, but I guess the parallel market rate has probably weakened as well. So what does this mean? I have here for the forecast, for the prognosis, for the outlook, I have here the forecast from three major international development partners, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Let's concentrate on the left-hand side. The bluish table, this is just the average of the forecasts of all three. And as you can see, we go from 4.8% in 2019 to just 1.5% growth in 2020. And then we see a quite strong recovery in 2021 to 5.1%. So what we see here in this forecast is a V-shaped recovery. However, this comes with several preconditions, and the one is that we are basically see now the peak of the pandemic, and the second one is also that there won't be new waves of the pandemic. Sorry. And also all these organizations have like more worst scenarios. So this is the base scenarios. They have worst scenarios, downside scenarios, but they don't have upside scenarios. This is also a bit telling. And it depends, of course, on the measures taken and how fast actually these measures are able to prop up both demand as well as production. Sorry, I can't move my chart. Oh, now it moves. Don't know what happened. So to give a little support of the idea of a V-shaped recovery, there you see again the difference, but this is the difference in sentiment indicators. And as you can see, in most countries, it's above zero. So it means most countries have in May become more optimistic compared to April, including we have also data for Kazakhstan here. So also in Kazakhstan, optimism increased quite a lot. So hopefully it comes like this. A bit of talk about the most vulnerable parts of the population. We have actually not the best data situation with regard to this, and the poor availability of data is actually an indicator of the poor protection itself. So we have definitely a problem here. The black line is just the simple average of all these protection measures announced here, like at least one protection, pension, some benefits for persons with disabilities, unemployment benefits, and poverty. So the worst here, look, unemployment benefits, they look most problematic. And on top, I quote here from Pravda, and you can see, I think, a large part of you is speaking Russian, so you can read that. And what it says that the Minister of Social Affairs was saying that more than 4 million people remained without income the last 2 months. This is out of a population in Kazakhstan of 18 million. So, but if you look at the unemployment figures, actually the unemployment rate did not move a lot, neither in Kazakhstan nor in other Central Asian countries. So in Kazakhstan, unemployment is 4.8%, very low and constant. So I guess there is some problem with recording the true unemployment, more or less all over the region, in part because of self-employed, in part because people go back to the villages, but there is some problems. A very important part also to be affected from the crisis is small and medium enterprises, and in low-income countries, especially micro and very small enterprises account for a large part, or a substantial part at least, of employment. And to some extent, this is the case also in Central Asia. Poverty, usually a high poverty ratio usually coincides with low social protection as well. We had this also before. And you see that in Uzbekistan, the rate is quite high, also in Turkmenistan, also in Tajikistan. So these are parts of the population which probably need special care during the crisis. Let me come to what countries actually are in a position to do. Let's speak a bit about the fiscal and monetary space the countries have to react. If you look first at external debt, so short-term external debt is not too bad in the region. However, overall external debt is high. it's in all the countries, it's needed more than a full year of export to repay it. So the debt is quite high. Debt service in some parts is also high. And what happens is that the weaker exchange rate, not only, and we saw before, all the exchange rate weaken. And this weaker exchange rate do not only fuel inflation, but also increase the foreign debt service in national currency terms. And if there are entities which are not fully hedged by export proceeds or other measures, this is quite a problem for these companies. So far I know, Uzbek Neftegas is among them. The international reserves are quite substantial in the region. They look pretty good, except for Tajikistan, and also there are some funds. However, if low dollar inflows because of low commodity prices and declining remittances and money outflows decelerate depreciations, countries could run into difficult position. So this kind of limits the space of monetary easing. We are not like the Fed or the European Central Bank or others, or major central banks in a position to print money. The Central Asia region is dependent on dollars from outside. So the space for monetary easing is quite limited. And this is also in part an answer to the question raised before, what kind of mix is preferable. The fiscal position of some Central Asian country is relatively favorable. So general government debt is rather low in the region, and Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan possess sovereign wealth funds. However, the drop in oil and gas prices strongly impacts the government revenues, both in Kazakhstan and in Turkmenistan, which of course worsens the financial situation of these countries. And what I said of the relative favorable position applies only to 3 countries: in the Kyrgyz Republic and in Tajikistan. Government debt is a problem. So what to do? Let's come to the responses by the Central Asian countries. And the fiscal packages in the Central Asian countries. I will not speak a lot about the monetary policy in the Central Asian countries. However, central banks in Central Asia also cut interest rates. You will see it a little bit later. On the fiscal side, we have substantial fiscal packages. Again, definitions vary, and certainly these are only rough figures, and the exact figures can be discussed. But as you see here, Kazakhstan 9% of GDP, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan also roughly 2% of GDP on measures, and the Kyrgyz Republic has not so much up to now, but the Kyrgyz Republic is getting money from the IMF, and the Kyrgyz Republic will prepare a much larger package as well. So in any case, it's clear that all these packages are of substantial size. This is a bit of an overview of what the countries in general do. So spending on healthcare and equipment and hospital capacity, all 5 Central Asian countries have adopted such measures. Special payments to healthcare workers as well, state loans and guarantees. 2 of the countries have tax reductions and deferrals to the population, for the population. 3 countries, support for micro or small enterprises done by 2 countries. Public works to support employment just by Uzbekistan. Financial support for self-employed. This measure is adopted by 3 countries. Expanding unemployment benefits, how precarious they are done by 2 countries. Paid sick leave for the infected, also by 1 country. 3 countries have adopted cash handouts. 2 countries provided also a food safety net for the most vulnerable. And as I mentioned, central bank cut in 2 countries, central bank cut the policy rates. There is liquidity support to banks in Kazakhstan. There's some changes in the regulation, so loans, the repayment periods for loans have been extended, and some other prudential requirements were also loosened. In Kazakhstan, there was intervention on the foreign exchange market as well, establishing in Uzbekistan a fund was established for where private donors could contribute, and 3 of the countries here approached international financial institutions for help, and there is solidarity also within Central Asia. So 2 of the countries extended help within Central Asia. Also, there were, of course, also some problems like limitation of some food exports by some countries. I will not run you through these 2 slides there. If you are interested later, you can look up a bit more in detail the measures adopted by the individual countries. So we have here all 5 countries, but I skip these 2 slides and won't come to move actually to a more discussion way of continuing. And so we see here a decree, a presidential decree issued on the 18th of May in Uzbekistan. So quite recently, we speaks about some of the measures to be extended until September of 2020. So there arises already the questions to what extent countries need to prolong measures, change measures. Also in Kazakhstan, there is some discussion about changing and prolonging the measures a little bit. So maybe we can discuss later where we stand here and how also other people think what needs to be done and to what extent measures need to be extended or changed. I was talking here a lot about the economy, but of course, not only the economy is important. The pandemic brings about a lot of social issues, not directly economic. Among them, for example, a worse standing of women in some areas, including also in households to some extent, and domestic violence has increased. So this is not the topic here of our discussion, the social measures, but I wanted to mention that, of course, we are aware that not only pure economy matters. Uh, let me come to the discussion part here. I open it kind of, so I already started with these questions. Is it already time to relax containment measures like closing schools, prohibiting big events and others? As you know, at least in Central Asia, in part in Europe, quite largely, these measures are already relaxed. The question is, do you agree with it, or should they be longer, or maybe they haven't even shouldn't have been as long as they have been? So I would like to hear the opinion also of others. Uh, if it's right to relax the measures, what people think, or we can discuss what is the likelihood of a second wave of the pandemic, and how long economic support programs therefore need to last. Even if there is no second wave, how long might it take for the economy to recover, and how much longer economic support programs need to last because of this reason? Will there be a V-shaped recovery? Which part of business and population should be targeted by support programs? Are direct transfer to the population better, or is crediting business the better way? How big is the fiscal space in Central Asia to go on with government support measures? To what extent monetary policy can be relaxed without causing too much currency depreciation and inflation? Would more regional cooperation help, or should better each country care for its own population? Should international organizations such as the IMF and the World Bank be approached? To be honest, I have no answer to all of these questions. I gave some answers to some of these questions, but keen to discuss. The even bigger question, which I did not address here, is what kind of future shall there be after COVID-19? You probably have heard there's a lot of talk about greening the economy, about digitalization and other things. So if someone has questions or ideas on this topic, I would also like to hear something of this, or discuss something of this. Thank you very much. You are muted, but
yeah, I'm muted. Thank you very much, Dr. Holzhacker. Very interesting discussion, and some of those questions you raised, I think, are food for thought for student viewers for their perhaps dissertation or upcoming coursework. So there are a couple of questions coming in, more than 5, but before we go to questions from the audience, I would like to ask our discussant, Oybek Yuldashev, to for up to 5 minutes to share his thoughts on the topic today. Please.
Dr. Holzhacker, thank you very much for a very detailed and interesting video and presentation on the impact of COVID and the measures in Central Asia to tackle it. In general, it is very interesting, and I think it provides a lot of elaboration about what we observed today. A couple of observations that I wanted to comment on. Specifically, these observations are on a certain slice and the data that has been used, and whether these data that is provided here are suspicious or not, if I may. If we will return, for instance, to the data where we reflect the amount of a working poor population, specifically the data for Uzbekistan seems a little bit strange, especially observing people here.
this one?
No, the one that is prior to this one, the population working for less than $1.99. Yes, that's the one. Well, first of all, I mean, it seems that a little bit higher than expected in general. But the second question is more interesting. That in your data specifically for Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, we observed that in general there's more working poor across males than across females in Uzbekistan, which is a little bit suspicious. And how would you explain this type of observations? That's the first question. The second question is associated with the V-shaped growth rates and the forecasts. If we may return to the slides that was preceding this one, the recoveries, just let me say.
Which was it? Yeah, this one. You mean this one?
Let me see. Yes, this one. For instance, we observed that definitely there is going to be a slowdown due to the pandemic in 2020, but in most of the countries we see a substantial growth rate. The recovery is very high. I mean, how would you explain this type of recovery in the economic growth rates, and what are the forces, in your opinion, that behind that are going to give such a rise to the recovery in the consecutive year? And the last comment, if I may, the last comment is with the foreign reserves and the in terms of imports. Basically, we would observe that that is slide 20, 25, I think so. Slide 25, yeah. Yes, this one. It seems that the figures are a little bit incorrect because approximately in 2019, approximately the Uzbekistan foreign reserves were approximately 30 billion US dollars, whereas the imports were approximately 20. So in terms of months of imports, this makes Uzbekistan reserves approximately 15 or 18 months. These are the general comments. Of course, I had the additional questions, but I only have 2 or 3 minutes to ask, and that's why I think I may join to, if we have some time after our participants ask the questions, I will ask mine also. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with the first question, which was about the poverty, right? And the only thing I can say is I was surprised as well when I saw the data. However, these are data from ILO, International Labor Organization, and I did not investigate what's wrong with them. But first, I also think they are wrong. I don't think female poverty is lower than male. But the only what I can imagine, and I was asking the question to myself as well, the only what I can imagine is this, that they would just ask about the income, and just the man would answer. I think it's probably a question of not even have a picture about how poor the women actually are. This is my only, but usually in all other countries it's different. So I had the same problem, but did not decide. I was thinking, shall I not show it in order not to discuss it? But then I said, okay, let's show it. But I had the same problem as you have. On the forecast, I think first, as I mentioned, these are quite optimistic forecasts. And secondly, I think to get there is some dynamic. So if we start to grow in the second half of this year, next year will look quite high, just because the first part of this year was so low. So it does not mean it looks better than it is actually. Yeah, it comes from a quite low basis. To give you an example, for the People's Republic of China, if I remember correctly, the IMF and also the others forecast for 2021 9% GDP growth. No one actually thinks this is like a sustainable, this is full output growth in China is 9%. Even also the Chinese don't think so. So it's more like 6. So I think this is in part just owed to the dynamic quarter by quarter, and it will come down later again. So in the second part of next year, it will be lower than in the first part. And on your third question on the reserves, I have to admit, first it's 2018 data, and I just took them as it is from the IMF. Again, I did not start to fill around with them, and I have to admit I have not really checked for any of these countries, but and also it's not just pure imports, it's imports of goods and services. So it might be a bit lower than if we just look at goods, but I believe that the reserves in Uzbekistan, I believe you that they are higher. But anyway, I was saying basically in all the 3 countries, the reserves are quite solid. The only exception is Tajikistan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our discussant, Oybek Yuldashev, and thanks to Dr. Holzhacker. So I will take a few questions from our viewers. There are some questions related to social safety nets and some more macro policies and the measures that were taken to respond by different governments. So and we have 5 to 7 minutes left. So let me just combine those, and I hope viewers will let me ask some of their questions. So the first question is Dr. Holzhacker. So from Kamujan Akramov, he writes, the evidence suggests that the distributional effects of COVID-19 are significant. In your estimate, how do they look like for Central Asian countries? Is there a need for changes in government social safety net policies? And related to this, question on inequality. So will inequality will it be raised in these countries, and what policies might be proposed in this regard? And related to this, also the question about return migrants, whether it will increase the unemployment rate among the youth, and whether there was any assessment done, vulnerability assessment done by urban and rural livelihoods. The next set of questions are about the measures taken to support the economy. So the first question is on this from our viewer Bakhjan. He asks, in Kazakhstan, the proposal was to support airports and luxury real estate development, and that was criticized by the public. Should the measures target poor people or specific sectors of the economy? Related to this, by Hursana Usmanova, the question is, considering the wide range of measures taken by the government of Uzbekistan? What opportunities will it create for Uzbekistan on regional basis as well as global levels? Will the position of Uzbekistan change anyhow in post-COVID-19 time? I guess those are the questions, and you can briefly answer those.
Okay, so let me start out with the question about inequality. I have not done any estimate how exactly the COVID-19 pandemic will change this. However, I'm pretty sure that this means it's particularly the vulnerable part of the population has become even more vulnerable, so more inequality. And as I mentioned before, I mean, definitely there is the need, even without COVID-19, to do more about social protection. Also, it's a bit difficult to measure the inequality, because what is usually done is to use the Gini coefficient, right, to measure inequality, which compares like deciles of population, like for example the richest 10% with the poorest 10%. However, I think this is only, I mean, it gives some idea. However, actually the big issue is not the richest 10%. The big issue is the richest 1%. So, and we don't have really numbers on this. So to answer the question, first, I think something needs to be done about the inequality. Yes, even without COVID-19. And I think also COVID-19 makes the question even more urgent, as many questions which are raised by COVID-19 are not completely new things, but they look sharper in the situation of this COVID-19 pandemic. The second question, I wrote it down, but could you repeat just the second was which one?
So the second question was about, for example, on distributional effects of COVID-19. Is there any need for changes in government social safety net policies?
No, this was the first one.
And how effective they are. And question was on return migrants and unemployment rates, but also vulnerability of rural and versus urban populations.
Okay, yes. So we were discussing during the presentation this already a little bit. It depends very much on the situation, and it brings me back also to this question about the airport, right, in Kazakhstan. So I don't have a direct opinion on the airport, and I actually cannot really write a government program on these issues in detail, but I think for Kazakhstan, for example, I think you need do kind of both. Yeah. Also, very important is to support the small and medium enterprises. The National Chamber of Entrepreneurs, for example, suggested to change some of the money in other programs like the Roadmap for Employment, especially to credit more small and medium enterprises, because they are very important for employment. So I think you need to have kind of approach, on one hand, if needed, approach the systemic relevant enterprises to keep the economy going. to approach also the medium and small enterprises and also to pay direct subsidies to those in need. And how you mix these things depends a bit how the situation is in the countries, whether you have, I don't know, in Carrick Institute, for example, we have also Pakistan as a Carrick country to look at. And there you have really big numbers of daily workers, which are even difficult to reach. So there you definitely need large programs to support this kind of workers, for example. So I think there has to be a mixture, and the governments have to come up with the best kind of mixture of all these measures related to the specific situation in the country. To the third question was about the regional, how would the COVID-19 affect the regional importance of Uzbekistan? Again, I'm not sure this is a pure COVID-19 question. I think first, generally, Uzbekistan is a very important country for cooperation and integration in the Central Asian region. Also because it's the largest, also because in terms of population, also because of the location and the links to Tajikistan and such things. This is structural. On top, the opening up policies of Uzbekistan, of course, open new opportunities to increase the weight of Uzbekistan, not only in the region. I think that the question is not only about to increase the weight in the region. The target is to increase the weight of the region globally by advancing integration and cooperation processes in the region. And I think Uzbekistan, also because of the internal reforms and also because of the better prospects now to attract foreign capital, overseas capital, among others. Because of all this, I think Uzbekistan has really a crucial, very crucial position in these processes and a very crucial role to play. And actually Uzbekistan started to play such a role even before COVID-19 by organizing big meetings on the regional, Central Asian regional level.
Okay, on this positive note, we're out of time. So I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Holzhacker for this very interesting and stimulating discussion. Thank you to our discussant, Aybek Yuldashev. Thank you to our viewers for joining us today. And all of the presentation materials, video, and slides will be uploaded to our website. This webinar was delivered and organized to you by Westminster International University, IFPRI, and IAMO. So thanks to all the organizers. And please join us next time on Wednesdays at 4:30 p.m. by Tashkent time to listen in to Katrina Kosik with her topic on the effects of income fluctuations on rural health and nutrition. So thank you to everyone and see you next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.